Good day, everyone. Thanks for joining us today for the third edition of our Maya Trails Guatemala Deep Dive series, this time focused on the northern region of Guatemala, the Peten region, famous, of course, for Tikal, but there's a lot more to explore in the Peten. I'm Tad Bradley, the North American sales and marketing rep for Maya Trails, coming to you from Seattle, a very rainy Seattle, which probably fits the stereotype you all have of our Emerald City. And joined right now by Jimmy Rogers, live from, well, it looks like Tikal, but I think you're actually in Guatemala City, Jimmy.
Guatemala City.
We're going to be joined shortly by a really special guest. We're very excited to have join us and educate us all on Maya archaeology, but in a way that we can all understand, which is the amazing thing about our special guest, Francisco Estrada-Belli. He's an archaeologist based right now in New Orleans at Tulane University. He's going to join us in a few minutes to jump into a deep dive into Holmul, which is a site that he's been studying and excavating for, I think, about 2 decades, but has spent his entire career and in fact started out deciding he wanted to be an archaeologist while sitting in Tikal at the age of 7. So he is he's really obviously very passionate and incredibly knowledgeable about Mayan archaeology. Before we get to Francisco, we're going to jump into a few other things that make the Peten the Peten. Here's a couple of image mosaic. Obviously, we all know Tikal, which is one of the greatest Mayan ruin sites and one of the greatest Mayan city-states back in the ancient Maya era, 1,500, 2,000 years ago. To the right is this image here is an image of Yaksha, which is a lesser-known Mayan ruin site. A great place to watch the sunset over the Yaksha Lagoon. Lake Petenitza, and this is somebody that led an Ecuadorian into Guatemala. You can see there, for those of you that know Jassy Carvalho from Tropic. He spent a holiday last year with his family exploring the Peten and other parts of Guatemala. That's them climbing one of the temples at Yaksha. I don't think we need to do any geographical orientation for those of you in the travel business, hopefully, but just in case, Guatemala here is in Central America, bordered by Mexico, Belize, and Honduras and El Salvador. I don't have the slide in for this presentation, but it's a lot of direct flights in ordinary times from Houston, LA, Miami, of course, and the longest flight is the direct flight from New York, which is a seasonal flight, which I think is about 4.5, 5 hours. So it's really not a long trip, especially if you're coming from Houston or Miami, where you're talking about 2.5 to 3 hours. Francisco, we'll get to your introduction in just a minute. Thanks for joining us. The Peten is really the heart of the Mundo Maya, the Mayan world. There are, according to Francisco, about 15 to 20 excavated Mayan ruin sites. Of course, the famous ones you all know, Tikal, maybe you know Yaksha, Huashactun, Cibao, El Mirador, and then we're going to talk a lot about Holmul today, which may be one you don't know a lot about, but you'll learn a lot more today from Francisco because he's, as I said, spent the last 20 plus years of his career finding some incredible things at Holmul as a National Geographic Explorer and archaeologist from Tulane. Lake Petenitza, great for water sports, kayaking, stand-up paddleboarding. Of course, there's the little town of Flores, which is the gateway to the Peten. You can see on the map here, if our videos aren't blocking it. If you fly into Guatemala City, you're going to spend some time in the highlands, more than likely. Antigua, another UNESCO World Heritage Site. Lake Gatitlan, of course. And then there's just a short flight up to Flores, about 45 minutes to an hour. There are, I think, 3 to 4 flights a day on a couple different airlines now. Is that correct, Jimmy?
Correct.
So you can fly from Guatemala City in the morning. There's actually a midday flight, and then there's evening flights, afternoon flights. You can also fly into Flores from Belize. So you could fly from Belize City into Flores on Tropic Air. Or if you're in the Cayo district of Belize, it's an easy hour to an hour-and-a-half drive, depending on where you're going in the Peten across the border. So really accessible for travelers in the region to get up and see the heart of the Mayan world. Lots of great birding. If you have birders, you probably already know this, but an incredible number of endemic and unique species in the jungles of the Peten, as well as lots of wildlife. Of course, jaguars is one thing that's there, and not many people do get to see them, but they are in the jungle. And as I mentioned, it's also the gateway to Belize. Very easy to combine the highlands of Guatemala and head up to the Peten. and then on to Belize, whether that's for more adventures in the Cayo or off to the coast for your adventures along the beach and on the keys of the Belizean Barrier Reef. We're going to go quickly through some other things to do in the Peten and some other ruins, and then we're going to get to Francisco, which I know you're not here to hear me talk or Jimmy talk. To be honest, you're here to hear Francisco. So we'll get through this quickly, but it is the heart of the ancient Mayan world. Tikal, of course, here in the upper left, most famous. I think between it and Antigua, #1 and #2 tourist destination visitor-wise in Guatemala. I like to say for families here, Jossie and his family are doing exactly what is so great for families at these Mayan ruin sites, is basically making it into an archaeological jungle gym for kids. There's a lot of smaller ruins you can climb up. Kids can climb up and over these big stone structures, and it really becomes a fun, almost Indiana Jones sort of archaeological adventure for families. So you can spend a lot of time going to many different sites. The two that we focus on for most of our tours in Guatemala is Tikal, of course, which is worth a day or at least a half a day. You can do a sunrise tour at Tikal. And then Yaksha, which you'll see in a minute. That's where we oftentimes do a sunset tour. It's a much smaller site, much more manageable, fewer people, and it really feels like you're stepping back in time because so much of it is still unexcavated. Then there's many others like Washaktun, and then of course today we're going to dive into Holmul, which is a great option for your exclusive groups, smaller groups that want to have a real expedition with an archaeologist like Francisco. Other adventure activities your guests can do in the Peten, from canopy tours, zip lining, kayaking on the Lake Petenitza, or stand-up paddleboarding, or on the mini lagoons. This is actually the lagoon of Las Lagunas Boutique Hotel, which is our preferred higher-end option in the Peten. So they have some great kayaking you can do on the very calm lagoons there. This is El Crater Azul, which Jimmy's going to tell you a little bit about. It's a sort of a new activity for Maya Trails, awesome for families as well.
Sí, Cráter Azul, it's fairly new experience. It's about an hour drive from Flores, let's say from Las Lagunas to Sayakshe River. Then you river boat down on a power boat, but it's kind of like a small cayuco. It's kind of like a small kayak. Where you can fit tons of people because it's a very long boat ride. And then you get to this, it's pretty much, it's super clear blue. It's known to be,
Sorry, Jimmy, I just muted you somehow on this thing here. I don't know if you can unmute yourself.
Okay, there. Okay, yeah. It's a natural birth of water that they still don't know why it's so clear blue. So supposedly, marine biologists say that it's due to the snails, and it's an excellent backdrop for underwater photography and naturalists and for families. Then you do a picnic lunch, and then you head back to Flores. So it's a pretty full day experience.
Another full day experience, or actually multi-day experience for your real adventurous hikers and trekkers is to trek out to El Mirador, which is one of the largest city-states that in existence in the Mayan world. Francisco can give us more specifics on that, but it's actually a 2 or 3 day walk through the jungle out to Mirador, or a 45-minute helicopter ride, which is how we often do it with guests. If you're trekking it, you're 2 or 3 days in, you spend the night there at the site, and then it's a couple of days out where you actually finish, I believe, at Washaktun or even close to Tikal. So for your real adventurous guests, that's something to think about and talk to Maya Trails about. And then wildlife, as I mentioned, jaguars are there, but unless you happen to be at the restaurant in Tikal with Francisco, which we'll talk about, you're probably not going to see a jaguar. We actually did see one on our fam trip with Francisco a couple of years ago, amazingly enough. But you've got cotamundis, spider monkeys, howler monkeys, which you can't miss because they're so loud, especially in the evenings and in the mornings. And then the incredible bird life as well. So certainly for birders, it's a must visit. And then sundowners, Guatemalan style. You can do this at Tikal, although we prefer to do it at Yaksha because it's a much smaller site and it has this incredible view over the Yaksha Lagoon, as you can see in the photos there. This is something you hike up Temple 216 in the evening and watch the sunset with some snacks, possibly some wine, and really just take in the incredible scene as the jungle begins to come to life. This is when you're going to hear the howlers really beginning their kind of demonic calls in the evening, and lots of bird life as the sun sets over Yaksha. And then glamping in the Mayan ruin site, we can do this at Yaksha as well, near the lagoon, or actually up near one of the Mayan temples. These pictures are from Washaktun. These are for smaller groups of, I think, up to 4 for the moment. Although we do have some more adventurous camping trips we can do at Yaksha for a few more people. But for the actual glamping inside the Mayan ruin site here at Washaktun, I think the max is 4. And you have full beds and showers and the whole deal. And then you get to eat dinner with right next to the Mayan temple with candles lighting up the stairs. Pretty cool experience for guests that want to really dig deep. All right, but you're not here to hear me talk. But if you ever wanted to time travel backwards, this is your chance, at least virtually. But if you want to do it in person, you can do it in Guatemala with the help of our guests today. You'll need a helicopter. Ideally, you can do it by road, but we wouldn't recommend it unless you got a lot of changes of clothes for the mud. And you'll probably need some mosquito spray as well. But our guest today is going to take you on a journey back in time to walk in the footsteps of the ancient Maya. So please welcome, for this virtual expedition, archaeologist and National Geographic Explorer Francisco Estrada-Belli from his home in New Orleans. Hi, Francisco.
Hey, Ted.
Great to have you here. I'm just going to give everybody your quick bio before we show a short video about some of your work, and then you can take it away. But as I mentioned, you're in your home office there in New Orleans. You're a professor of archaeology at Tulane, also a National Geographic Explorer, author of the first Mayan civilization, Ritual and Power Before the Classic Period. I have to read some of this because it's a lot and it's impressive. He directs a multidisciplinary archaeological project in the Holmul region of the Peten, which you'll hear a lot about today, focusing on early developments of Mayan civilization, human environmental dynamics, and classic period political organization. He co-founded the Maya Archaeological Initiative, a nonprofit organization that promotes research and youth education on Maya heritage. And he is one of the co-directors of Guatemala's Pacunam, Lidar initiative, the largest archaeological survey ever undertaken in the Maya lowlands. So we're going to dive into Holmul in a second. I just want to share my own experience with Francisco a couple of years ago with Jimmy and a fam trip that we did throughout Tikal. It was incredible having an archaeologist with the breadth of experience and knowledge of Francisco as our guide. These are the kind of things that we can do for your guest. If you'd like to bring Francisco in as a guide to take your guest around Tikal or Yaksha or any of the other Mayan ruin sites in the Peten, he is available to do those types of things, certainly with enough advance notice. And we do have to take care of him for that trip down to Guatemala if he's not already there. But it was absolutely worth it, a true insider's experience with our fam group. You can see all of us here. This photo is one of my favorites where my mouse is, because Francisco told us the story there of when he was 7 years old, sitting in the very same spot, looking out over Tikal in those days, and knowing at that moment at 7 that he wanted to be an archaeologist. I'm getting chills again, as I did when I was there with him, because we sat in that very same spot. You know, I don't want to date you, Francisco, but 30-some years later, and here he was living his dream. And we were sitting where he was when he was 7, when he decided this is what he wanted to do. So it just was such a privilege to be able to travel around Tikal with this group. And then Jimmy recently, last year, went out to Holmul with a small Maya Trails group, an exclusive group of a small group of travelers to go and see Francisco's work at Holmul. Of course, he's in a helicopter, which made me jealous. And then he got to go to see Holmul, which made me even more jealous. So again, these are the type of things we can do with your guests, should you want to. And lastly, before we hand it over to Francisco, we're going to show a short video preview of some of the work he's been doing recently with the LIDAR initiative around the Peten. And this was featured in the Nat Geo documentary, Lost Treasures of the Mayan Snake King. So stand by for a short video, and then I'll hand it over to Francisco.
Deep in the jungles of Central America, more than 1,000 years ago, a remarkable hidden civilization was created. Now, a groundbreaking research project, the biggest of its kind, is using a new technology. to map vast areas of unseen jungle for the very first time.
It's like a magic trick.
This is amazing.
Revealing thousands of new discoveries right across the Maya world.
The survey is the most important development in Maya archaeology in 100 years.
As soon as I saw the images, it was obvious that this was a game changer.
The Maya were always considered one of the great ancient civilizations of the Americas. But this unique project, alongside breathtaking discoveries on the ground,
Looks like it's freshly painted.
and the decoding of Maya writing, is placing the Maya beside Egypt and China at the very top table of the greatest ancient civilizations in the world. Before the Lidar survey, no one had any idea what lay beneath most of the jungle. Now they can see it all.
This is amazing. I mean, this is the way of the future. 2 hours of lidar flight, we discover more new sites than in 20 years of field investigation.
Oh, man.
So hopefully that got you excited to hear more about LIDAR as well as about Holmul. Here's a map, shows you where the Holmul site is. Francisco will have a better map. I'm gonna stop sharing my slides now and let him take over and really immerse us into the world, his world of Holmul. So Francisco, over to you.
Thank you so much, Dad. And hi, Jimmy. Thank you for inviting me. It's always fun. I'm always happy to talk about Holmul and Maya archaeology. And so I have a few slides I want to show you about the things that we found at Holmul and why I think it's such a fascinating site. And let me see if I can share my screen real quick. So you saw in the documentary overlaps with my presentation. I'll have some slides about the new maps that we made at the end, but here I just want to talk about the site itself and how it helped us understand Maya history, Maya civilization a little bit better in the last 5 years, really. Holmul, when I started working there 20 years ago, was largely unknown. We certainly didn't know it had any kings or was really part of this grand history written in stone that we know from places like Tikal or Tsibanche or Calakmul. And over the years, we have been uncovering lots of inscriptions that actually open up a new window into Maya history, which was something I did not expect when I started working here. And in addition to that, there's beautiful art that it was perfectly preserved. It's still buried, but I fixed our excavation tunnels in a way we can bring a few people in there at a time to see this fantastic product of Maya artistry. So Holmul, as Ted was saying, is one of the more remote sites in the Maya lowlands. It's up in the northeast, to the east of Tikal, near the border with Belize. And in this map here, you see some of the big players in Maya history, places like Tikal, El Sots, Calakmul, which was the capital of the famous Snake Kingdom that at one time defeated Tikal and, as we know now, actually conquered many of the other Maya kingdoms. Of course, when I started working at Holmul, we didn't know any of this 20 years ago. But that's why Maya archaeology is so exciting, because every year we find something that changes our understanding and enriches our understanding of Maya history. And so Holmul actually does have a part to play in this, in Maya history, as we know now. It's not one of the largest cities. It's probably one of the secondary kingdoms in the Maya world, but because of its location and because it was such a long occupied city, it actually figures in Maya history quite prominently. I was surprised. This is a reconstruction of what Holmul may have looked like about 1,000 years ago, before it was completely abandoned for unknown reasons. And we still don't know why people left, but they did. The city itself would have been filled with houses surrounding these paved plazas. And this reconstruction was done by an architect based on the maps that we had at the time. And so he put the houses where we have located houses. Of course, now we know that there were way more houses and there were much fewer vegetation, trees, and there was very little forest around Holmul at the time, as a true city, surrounded by jungle, but far in the distance. The two main pyramids are the ones that we've investigated more recently. In 20 years, we excavated in different parts of the site and in the periphery. We found other sites around Holmul, so we could understand it from its context a little better. And I want to show you what we found in these two pyramids. There are things that you can see when you visit the site. The site is, as I said, is not easy to get to, so we have very few visitors every year. Literally, maybe 3 or 4 groups every year of maybe 5 to 10 people. So this is one of the structures that you can see at the site. This was a recent photo. The site looks a lot like it has not been investigated for 20 years. And I said it with a little bit of pride because part of its magic is the jungle that still covers the ruins. And I like to present it as I first saw it when I was still a student. And I thought maybe I wanted to do a project here. And it's really unusual in that sense because there's still a lot of architecture that is standing as if the Maya just left a few years ago. Here you have this black painted doorway that leads into a long hallway into this mound that actually was a pyramid that was never finished. And inside that unfinished pyramid, there is a tomb. And below the tomb, there is another pyramid that I'll show you in a minute. And it was quite fantastic how many things we found inside this. It just looks like a ruined structure. Here's an overlay of what we found behind the doorway inside that pile of rocks. So very well preserved buildings and even some tombs, the tombs of the kings of the dynasty. I didn't even know they had a dynasty until I found this. This is this amazing carved and painted decoration on the rooftop of an earlier structure that was buried by the last pyramid. We found this in 2013. We spent many years doing conservation on it. And it's a beautiful work of art, but it's also an incredible page in Maya history. Because in addition to all these elaborate carved figures that you see in the photo, there's a long inscription at the bottom that tells us about the dynasty. And as I said, we didn't know anything about any dynasty from Holmul prior to this. And it tells us about their political affiliations as well. And so it was just amazing. Here's a general view of the whole carving. It's 8 meters long, goes from corner to corner over on the roof of this temple. Very much like the temples that you see at Tikal, they have these very elaborate carved roof structures. Although at Tikal they've been all destroyed by the environment over the last 1,000 years. But here we have a view of what those temples must have looked like if it had been covered up by the Maya. And clearly this is not the only one that we have found in Maya archaeology. There are other examples of structures like this that were buried and they reveal their beautiful art. This is perhaps just one of the better preserved ones. So in the middle, you see the image of a king. seated with his big feather headdress on top of this monstrous head. There is the body of a feather serpent that comes out of the mouth of that monstrous head that represents a mountain. And when you visit the site, I'll give you a longer explanation. I just want to show you a few things to just to highlight how beautiful this is and how richly decorated. The face has been damaged. That was not by accident. It's really the only place in the carving that was damaged, so it was probably done on purpose. Here are some of the other figures that decorate. There's a whole history in terms of that has been told by these figures. It's actually an image of the king rising from his burial as the sun god, and is accompanied by these gods of the night sky, providing sustenance to him in the shape of the hieroglyph for tamales. Here's an image of the open mouth of a feather serpent. Here's the eyes of the serpent. Here's the fangs, as if it's about to bite something. It's actually exhaling, because the breath of feather serpents is the life substance of gods in Maya belief. Here's another one of these royal figures rising from the dead as sun gods. And here's the inscription, just briefly. We have the name of 5 kings in the dynasty, the 5 kings prior to AD 600. So see, these are the earlier kings. There were kings after this we don't know anything about. But we're able to not only read the names, but learn about their affiliation. This is the last king in the list. He's the son of the one who's being celebrated in the carving as the successor, and it was probably his father. And he tells us that he was a vassal of the Snake Kings, the famous kings of Calakmul and Sibanche, that by this time had pretty much defeated all the other kingdom and turned them into their subjects. So very important information about Maya history at this time. And here is the structure with the carving. And then amazing, another structure underneath. And in this red box was the tomb that we now identify as the tomb of the character depicted in the carving. And here's a snapshot of what that tomb looked like when we got in there after many weeks of excavation in these very small tunnels with very little air. And you can see how many pottery pieces were in there. Just one example of one of them. Here you have a depiction of the god of the underworld, the god of the dead, coming out of the shell. Looks like a marine shell or snail with a big lotus flower above it, the symbol of the underworld, the lotus flower. So very appropriate. And as I said, in this sequence of buildings, we found a throne room that may have been occupied by the very king that was buried underneath the throne and celebrated in the roof of the structure above it. And this is the burial of what we think might be the queen, his queen. So it's just remarkable that by having this long-term investigation, we were able to find very detailed historical information and identify the individuals physically. We have recovered the remains of the individuals mentioned in the local history. And we have found their jewelry. In this particular case, it's just a remarkable object because not only is beautiful, it's made of jade, but behind has a dedication. It doesn't have a name of a local king, but it has the name of the overlord from the Snake Kingdom, from the Kanul Kingdom. And so we can infer a lot of interaction between the small king going up to the capital of his overlord and receiving a gift like this one, that eventually will end up in his tomb. And we're finding it, 1,500 years later. Just remarkable. So just going quickly, moving to another pyramid and show you what we found there, very similar. This is about 600 years earlier, a temple known as Building B that has actually 4 temples underneath what you see on the surface. These are all built over time, one on top of the other. The first one has this amazing decoration. This is the area we cleared in the rubble that covered it, and is the tunnel that visitors can go in, a few at a time, to stand, up close and personal, and stare at the god of the underworld right into his eyes. Here's a profile of the monstrous depiction. This is the depiction basically of the god of the earth, in whose mouth is the old god, the god of the dead. And here you have crossbones and skulls, actually indicating this is the world of the dead. And here are a recent group of visitors, our VIP visitors. This is a picture of our camp, where we might be able to do clamping if we want. Here's a landing pad for helicopters. It looks very small when you fly over it. In fact, many pilots have missed it in the past, in the first few flights. But when you actually land on it, it's pretty big, and you can fit actually 3 helicopters parked at a time. Just wanted to make that point. Here, some of the vehicles are owned by local members of the community that are now gearing up for tourism, which is still, in its incipient stage in terms of building up infrastructure. These are some of our VIP tourists going from the helicopter pad to our site, going through this cloud of butterflies on the muddy road. And here they are. So as you can see, it's a very limited space. You can see every detail of the carving, but we can't really have more than 4 or 5 people in there at the time. So, for a small group, that's not a problem. Now, moving on to the final part of my presentation, in answer to the question of what did Lidar, this new technology, do for us, like the documentary said, it changed everything. And so it just, the most emblematic example is Tikal, which you see here at the center of the map. In the white, in the red box, you have the map that we had before Lidar, done by University of Pennsylvania over many years in the 60s, at 16 square kilometers. And pretty much we thought that was the center of Tikal. But now we have about 100 square kilometers around it, and there appears to be no end in sight for the urban sprawl that surrounded this central part of the city. And we're hoping to get more LiDAR to see the rest of it here to the south and the west, because the projections are that it's going to keep going. And so this might be the largest Maya city after all. Another quick look at what it did specifically in my area, what LiDAR did for me in my research. In white, you see all the structures that I was able to map in 20 years of 15 rather, 20 years of very arduous cutting through the jungle on foot to locate structures and pyramids and large and small. And this is what the LiDAR did in 2 weeks. In fact, in this area, they may have just spent 2 days flying over it. And we went from 1,000 structures to 5,000 structures. And that was just the beginning, because then we realized that all these areas that were wetlands, we thought could be unusable for the Maya because they flood periodically, were actually turned into some of the most productive by building drainage channels that would regulate the flow of water to make them into well-irrigated fields. In addition to that, we had defensive works on many hilltops. It looks like the entire valley was fortified. Anyway, thank you so much for allowing me to share my experience. Thank you.
Thanks, Francisco. Man, that's just a snapshot, I realize, but so cool. I don't know what else to say. So friggin' cool. Jimmy, what did you feel like when you looked into the eyes of the god of the underworld?
It was amazing. It was crazy. I had never been. I had been to all these Maya sites, but being inside of there, I'm not a selfie person, but I was inside there taking selfies of myself with this Mayan structure and with Francisco, because having that experience of having Francisco, having his his experience, you know, it's like you mentioned at the beginning, it's kind of like Indiana Jones discovering new things. At the end of the structure, there's a big hole, so he'd always tell you to be careful because you'd fall down to. That's where they found that Maya burial. So it's just crazy, just amazing. It's a must do.
Yeah, I mean, to be able to go somewhere with someone whose life's work is on display and be there with that person is it's got to be pretty special. And for you, Francisco, as well, to be able to share your life's work with guests at the actual site of it must be something very special as well.
It's very special. I feel very lucky that I've been able to work there. So I'm always happy to share my experience with others.
Peggy, thank you so much. We're going to actually open it up to questions in just a second. I do want to quickly cover a few other things, and then we'll have Francisco here for any questions you have about him. But the first thing is, you can go and you can send your guests to Holmul with Francisco, or if helicopters to Holmul are beyond the budget, then I would highly recommend for your guests that are really into Maya archaeology to the very least consider bringing Francisco on as a specialist guide for Tikal or Yaksha or some of the more accessible Maya ruin sites that don't require a helicopter. But we've put together just a sample itinerary. This is definitely for small groups and generally at your higher end of the spectrum, just because of the costs involved. But it would be an epic trip and that we have done in the past. So, and this idea is to start off exploring the highlands, beginning in Antigua. Francisco has a house in Antigua that I had the privilege to visit when I was there last time, and to see his lab where he has some of the antiquities and pottery that they have discovered in various sites in the Peten that is being archived and cleaned up and made ready to go into the Archaeological Museum in Guatemala City and maybe elsewhere. And so I had the privilege to be able to hold a 1500-year-old Maya pot in my hands, which was, again, you get chills just thinking about it again. So the opportunity there to go and see the lab, as well as to have drinks or dinner at his house, which also has a really nice view overlooking the Antigua Valley, and then off to Lake Atitlan, probably on the way to visit the Iximché ruins, which are an interesting Mayan site in the highlands of Guatemala, which is a bit different, earlier part of the civilization, and then spend a couple of days at Lake Atitlan, of course, immersing yourself in the modern Maya experience, meeting local Mayan people. And that's something, again, we don't forget that the Maya may have the heights of their civilization may have collapsed back 1,000 years ago, but they are still very much alive today and represent over 50% of the population in Guatemala. We have an opportunity to go to Tacalicabac, which is a very early, I think, pre-classic Mayan site on the Pacific lowlands. So you can start with learning about how the Maya began, the origins of the civilization, and then time travel back to the Peten, and starting with visiting Tikal and Yaksha, possibly with Francisco, I would highly recommend, and then heading off to Holmul via helicopter and getting that full day of immersion into Francisco's life's work. As he said, there's an opportunity potentially for glamping at the site. So if you want to have guests spend the night, that is a possibility. It is pretty rustic. It's obviously an active archaeological dig site. So you have to keep that in mind. Or it's just a one-day flight in, spend most of the day, and then fly back out. And then the following day back to Guatemala City, where getting a tour of the Archaeological Museum in Guatemala City with Francisco again would be a super highlight. Also going to the Iximché Museum, which Maya Trails has special access to the vaults there, thanks to Jimmy's wife Nikki, who is on the board of the Ixchel Museum. which is the preeminent Mayan tapestry and weaving museum anywhere in the world. And then day 9 would be your departure day. So just to sample an idea of how you could really have an incredibly immersive archaeological expedition with a true expert, guided by, at least partially guided by Francisco. So consider that. And again, small groups, so you're able to really offer this on a very exclusive basis. In this COVID era, people wanting to be more exclusive and in smaller groups, this is a great way to promote that for Guatemala. And then very quickly, and then we'll have Q&A, just a few of the hotels. We're not going to get into detail here, but you can always ask Jimmy for further details on any of these. Las Lagunas Boutique Hotel is definitely our go-to higher end property in the Peten. Is lovely on this lagoon. And as you can see, all of the rooms are actually self-contained individual little bungalows that are actually out over the lagoon. Jimmy, I think, what, there are 15 or so of those units? 18, yeah. And you've got this beautiful main lodge with infinity pool. The food there is fantastic. They have their own little wildlife preserve on site as well. You can go kayaking in that lagoon. So lots to do on site. And then you are 15 minutes from Flores Airport, Jimmy, more or less?
About 15 minutes. And something to add on as well is these units, that we have 2 units that are connected, so they're very good for families.
Perfect. And or 2 couples traveling together. And then I think it's about 45 minutes to an hour from Tikal and some of the other ruin sites up near that way.
And then from there, they have their own heliport, so you're just basically about 35 minutes to Holmul by helicopter from La Lagunas.
So you don't even have to go back to Flores Airport. You just fly right from the lodge, from the hotel. That's great. Across the lake, across Petenitza, another one of our favorites is Bolonticu, very sustainably built right along the lake. This is on the main Petenitza Lake, whereas Las Lagunas is on its own side of shallow lagoon off of the main lake. Again, Jimmy, I think, what, 10-ish rooms here at Bolonticu, something like that?
See, they have about 14 rooms.
Do they have a helipad as well, or is this a case where you'd have to go back? Yeah.
No, they have their own helipad as well.
So this would probably be number 2 of our higher end options in the lake. It does require either having a helicopter to cross the lake or doing a boat transfer.
Correct.
And how far is that boat from Flores?
The boat ride is about 30 minutes from Flores.
Yeah, it's a nice ride. The lake is beautiful, and it just is a little bit more remote than Las Lagunas in terms of farther away from Flores and from the airport.
Correct.
La Lancha, the Coppola property, is up on the north end of Lake Petenitza, closer up to Tikal and Yaksha. So for accessibility to the ruins, it is a little bit closer. And another beautiful property that's pretty remote that we do like.
See, the only issue, they don't have a helipad, so we have to drive the guests out to a piece of land or a soccer field where we do the helipad, and then we fly them out.
Gotcha. And then actually inside of Tikal, or right on the grounds, is Jungle Lodge, which has been there forever, but recently did get refurbished. Jimmy, what are the details on that refurbishment?
They refurbished it about 2 years ago. It's still very eco, 10 p.m. lights out, because everything is power generated. But they have these new, I think it's like 2 or 3 new suites. It's like the photo on the bottom right-hand side. And then the rest of the rooms are very basic, but it's all being refurbished. So there's 3 lodges inside of the park. They're pretty much close together, but the only one that we pretty much offer and want guests to stay at is Jungle Lodge, because it's the most well kept. The other 2 are more basic, standard. They have their camping as well, but we stick to Jungle Lodge. They know how to do things.
And the advantage, I guess, to Jungle Lodge is that you're right there at Tikal. So if you're doing like a sunrise tour, you don't have to leave your hotel at 3 or 4 in the morning. You have a little bit more time to sleep before you head off to the site.
Yeah.
So that's that's a bonus. And I guess you also, if you want to do the sunset tour at Tikal, you have to stay at one of the properties on site, and this would be one of them. So
See, basically, we suggest if you want to do the sunset or the sunrise at Tikal on Temple 4, we suggest that you stay in Jungle Lodge. It's much more logical.
yeah.
Yeah.
All right, so we're going to open it up for questions. I've got a few already for Francisco. This is that picture from the top of Temple 216 at Yaksha, where you can have sundowners, Guatemala style, overlooking the Yaksha Lagoon and the jungle as it comes to life. I thought this was kind of a nice calming picture for all of us to end on in these turbulent times, just to put ourselves in this place that is a really peaceful, incredible place to spend an hour or so watching the sunset. So go ahead, and if you have questions for Jimmy or I, or for Francisco, pop them into the Q&A or the chat panel. And I'll kick it off, Francisco, with a question. You had talked about Tikal and how much bigger the number of structures and the suburban sprawl, if you will. Do you guys have an estimate now of the size or the number of the population of Tikal, and has that changed thanks to Lidar?
Yes, but it's still preliminary because, as I said, we expect that number is going to increase when we get more LiDAR to the south and the east. So we think there might be a lot more people settling. But so right now, our estimates, actually, in terms of the population that we were able to measure right now, we're about 100,000. Which is not much more than some of the more optimistic estimates for Tikal before LiDAR. Again, that's because Tikal was one of the most studied Maya cities in Maya archaeology, so a lot of people put some time into really estimating the population size there, even though we have very limited data. And so, but the range started at about 50,000. To 100,000, and now with LiDAR we think it's much closer to 100,000 in the area that we mapped. And of course we don't know how many more might be living outside of the area.
So that's just the area you showed the picture of, but there's all that other parts of that have yet to be mapped by LiDAR that could have a lot more structures and therefore more people.
I know my colleagues are probably going to roll their eyes when I say this, but I wouldn't be surprised if it would be double that when we finish with the LiDAR.
Wow. Jimmy, you have a question here from Andres. Do you want to?
I got a question here from Andres, my good buddy from Mountain Lodges of Peru. His passion on ancient civilizations, and we did a trekking adventure when we were in Barrichara last year, and that's all we talked about was ancient civilizations. So he was very excited for the presentation, and he's asking Francisco if you're using GPRS technology to find underground structures once in the field.
Yes and no. So I know about that technology. And I haven't been able to use it, but some of my colleagues have. And one of the problems with that technology is that in a jungle environment where there are so many roots everywhere, big trees growing everywhere, it's difficult to operate that equipment. My experience is that you need a very even surface to roll that equipment, or at least the antenna, on the ground so that it can send a signal underground and map out what's there. But when you're trying to climb a pyramid that is basically a pile of loose rocks with roots and things with thorns and all that, you can't cut that down. It tends to be difficult. But some people try it, at least in the plazas, where they're able to clear enough of an area, and they have mixed results. Because the limestone environment also doesn't lend itself well to this electromagnetic signal. So I think people are still experimenting.
Interesting.
Awesome, thank you, Francisco. And then we have Colin, my great buddy. I don't know if you're in Europe or in Canada. I don't know where you are, Colin, right now, but My regards to you. He
Good to
goes,
see your name, Colin. Good to see your name, our friend. It's been a while.
Okay. So he goes, great webinar, thank you. I have a question about future excavation programs. Now that the LiDAR has revealed stuff that might keep you busy for the next 100 years.
And
So are
that's a
you-
direct quote.
So Francisco, is there plans to do another LiDAR survey in the works?
Yes, well, as a matter of fact, I hope we only do LiDAR surveys from now on, because there's really no point in exploring the Maya lowlands without having the benefit of already knowing what's going to be there when you get out the door.
Right.
Yeah.
When you get out the car and start hiking, it's always nice to already know where you're going. And this is something that we could not have before. And so I would encourage my colleagues not to waste their time going out there without LiDAR on their tablet.
That's so cool. I mean, yeah, if you like hiking without a map, I guess, in the thick jungle on top of it.
Yeah,
You-
we've done enough of that.
Yeah, right. Well, you spent what 20 plus years doing that, so this has got to be a whole new world.
Yeah, entire lives has been spent doing that, just hiking in the jungle, basically without knowing whether you're going to find something or not.
Which you're going to stumble across. Yeah. How did that actually brings up a question? How did you end up at Holmul, and start the majority of your career spent at Holmul? I know you've done a lot of other stuff too, but what brought you to Holmul of all places?
It was a funny story because I was a student in a project in Belize, and my professor later became my mentor, is English, and he always wanted to work at a site in Guatemala, but because England and Guatemala were at odds over, the Belize, British Honduras, the whole affair, he basically said, look, there's this site that I always wanted to work at, but they never let me because I'm English. But you're Guatemalan, they'll let you. And so he basically told me to get off the truck one day and just start hiking, and then he would pick me up 3 days later while he was taking the students to Tikal. And so I had to find a way into Holmul, and I didn't have any money, and so it was an adventure.
Wow.
That's real adventure travel in those
Yeah, it was
days.
an adventure. I found it, and then I was overwhelmed by the size of the pyramids, and so I decided I better not do that as a student, but get my degree first and then go back, and that's what I did.
You mentioned in your presentation about how LiDAR has exposed that the size of Holmul is much larger, and that architect's rendering with all the trees around it was probably inaccurate, and then that most of that area would have been deforested and filled with homes. I know this is one of the big questions, but is deforestation increasingly becoming one of the reasons people think there was a decline of the civilization, or at least of some of these city-states, because of that?
Yes. So one of the theories of the so-called collapse is that the Maya degraded their environment by deforesting it and by causing erosion. But now we're finding that they had deforested their environment a long time before, for at least 1,000 years before the end of the classic period. And so we knew this, and so but we didn't know how they managed their environment to make it last for at least 1,000 years that way. And so now with the LiDAR, we can see all these what we call land desk investments. So investment in terracing and walls and dams and irrigation system that not only increase productivity, but also prevent erosion and soil degradation. That's how they did it.
Huh.
And so that theory about the Maya degrading their environment is no longer viable, at least in my opinion.
Interesting.
We have to rethink everything.
Yeah, it sounds like that. Again, LiDAR has, as you said, I think in the in the video that Lidar's changed everything. Last question for me, and then if anybody else has any final questions, or Jimmy, please enter them now. If not, we'll wrap it up. But the frieze that you found inside of Holmul, is that not one of the largest, if not the largest, intact Mayan frieze ever found in the Mundo Maya?
I'm not sure about the largest. It might be one of the largest, but it's certainly one of the better preserved. Not only in terms of the carving being all there, but the pigmentation, the coloring that the Maya apply is mostly red, as you can see, and but it's also got some details in yellow and green and blue. You know, I have never seen that before anywhere else.
And yeah, Jimmy, well, I guess finish up, Jimmy. Just tell us again, being there, standing in front of that carving.
See, when I saw the pictures before, and Francisco always told me about the colors and everything, but once we got there and saw the coloring, that's crazy amazing. And then the way that he explained when they found it, that a couple years later, I think it was a year, 2 years later, they started digging down below, and that's when they found that the carvings down below that had kind of like the history that was that had. So every day they're there, they just keep finding and finding and finding, and it's and just being there watching it, it's amazing. And like Francisco said as well, we if we can set up a camp and do an overnight in Holmul, we've never done it before, but I know anything can be done, and with Francisco as well, we can set that up.
That actually brings up one last question for you, Jimmy and Francisco. What is the best time of year or the season where these types of visits out to Holmul are possible or recommended?
Ooh, I'll leave that one to Francisco. He's been in the jungle more than I have.
Well, anytime really. The road, again, it's really not a very good road any time of the year. So it just goes from bad to worse. And that's why we recommend the helicopter. And so the helicopter can fly almost year round. And it's just a matter of, you know, there is a big tropical storm. And that typically, you know, in, I think the worst rains are in September. And so bar that, I think every month of the year, you can have enough of a break in the weather that you can fly the helicopter on most days.
Yeah.
And
the time, just sorry, Ted, the time we did it last year we did it in February, I remember. February is pretty much our dry season, but up in the jungle, it rains anytime. And I remember when we were flying back, we had to fly around a small storm so we could get back in the Flores. But that's why it's anytime, pretty much anytime.
You're making me more jealous, Jimmy.
You know, many years ago, you could only get to Tikal by flying into Tikal on a passenger plane, on one of those DC-30, or I'm not sure.
It was a small Cessnas.
The Cessna.
Yeah.
And so, you know, since the 80s, that hasn't been possible. But now you can fly into these sites around Tikal and experience, you know, that amazing feeling that you're about to land somewhere in the small spot in the middle of the jungle, and there's going to be ruins right there. I find that fascinating.
That's so cool.
Okay.
And what in a typical year, Francisco, what months are you down in Guatemala and out at Holmul, or does it depend?
Typically, I'm there in the summer.
Got it.
Except for this year.
Yeah. Well, hopefully next summer you'll be back, or maybe even before. Fingers crossed that we start to see some things begin to open up. And that's another webinar, Jimmy, for later to talk about this current situation in Guatemala. But we're all hoping that we'll be able to get back to this business of travel soon. But
yeah,
we're going to wrap it up. And thank you so much, Francisco, for joining us. And educating us is just inspirational and exciting. I've got a perma smile on for the rest of the day, so thank you very much.
My pleasure.
And Jimmy,
it was such a treat for everyone, and for us as well to have Francisco here live, guys. So thank you very much, Francisco.
and Jimmy, you're not going to Holmul again without me.
Okay.
No, not again. If you have more questions, feel free to to email us. We may have a last minute one here. Great
Peggy says me too.
And we'll send out a recording if you missed any of it. We'll also send some links to some really interesting articles about Holmul and about Lidar, as well as a link to the video that we showed earlier if you want to watch in its entirety. So take care, everyone. Be safe. Stay healthy. Francisco, hope to see you soon. Jimmy, hope to see you soon.
Yeah.
And thanks to everybody for joining us.
Bye.
Take care, everyone. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Have a great time. Bye-bye.